So, Stephen, I have one for you. Um, I thought what you said about speaking to students and sort of educating them on these credits was really interesting. And so I'm curious, what are your thoughts on how well these credits are understood, and what have your internal conversations been like as you talk about these with colleagues at Brown?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say that in general, the people who don't live in the carbon markets, and so everyone on this call presumably lives a little bit in the carbon markets, or they wouldn't be on this call. But in general, there is no distinction between the types of offsets that are out there on the part of the students or the faculty at Brown if they're not in the carbon space. They view offsets either as an interesting financial instrument, and they're interested in business, and so they think it's kind of interesting because it might help. But by and large, they think that it's greenwashing and it's kind of a scam and a way for corporations to avoid doing what they should be doing, which is reducing emissions. And in fact, we had a whole conference on carbon offsets for our community that included Jen Jenkins as well as others to talk about what it is and what it isn't, and how one might think about offsets in a more nuanced way. But I would say that that conversation is largely absent, both from the popular press coverage, where offsets are often all lumped together, but also I would say, maybe as a result of the popular press, like in my community. And I would say that it's not particularly surprising to me that the nuance is lost given the complexity. So when you talk about something like using electricity to pull CO2 out of the air and store it underground, and compare that to potentially avoiding deforestation in a place where you're measuring statistically that deforestation is or isn't lower, to somebody who's running a pipe out of a landfill, to somebody else who's taking a bunch of cow manure, generating extra methane by adding food waste, and then capturing some of that methane and selling it without knowing what the counterfactual is vis-a-vis, like, that's really complicated stuff, right? And so it all gets lumped under offsets, and that's the public perception. And I think one of the challenges for the carbon markets moving forward for these kind of offsets and every other is to figure out how to de-risk it. And I know that's what Rubicon is working on, but I mean de-risk in multiple categories. So the most important risk to me is that the offset doesn't actually deliver the climate benefit that it says it does. And right, that is, to me, as someone who spends their life worrying and working on climate solutions, that's the biggest risk. But there's other kinds of risks, like public perception, like what does the rating agency do? Like, what is the time value of carbon? There's all these sort of scientific uncertainties, right? And all of those risks have to be quantified in some way. So Donna, I really like Donna's like rating chart of the different offsets. But my first question, of course, for her is like, okay, well, let's get into the nitty gritty of how you did those ratings, right? And so I think we're at a better place than we were a few years ago when Brown was considering this. Like there were projects that were bid into us that had no scientific merit whatsoever, right? I think that's less likely to happen now, but we haven't actually gone back out onto the market. So I'll defer to my Rubicon friends to tell me if that's true. But anyway, so that's a bit of where I think the public is.